conservative, constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And welcome everybody to another amazing day right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Before I dig down into it, please make sure you comment, like, share, subscribe if you're listening to this on the social media or in a podcasting platform. If you're watching this on TV or listening to it on the radio, I do encourage you to head over to theandrewshow.com and hit the Listen Now tab to see all the different places where you can tune into the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Now, normally I start off by listing off the topics we're going to dig into today, but generally speaking, what we're going to cover today has to do with an overarching idea of how our politicians are thinking about government and how that affects things here in Kentucky. I want to start off by outlining a little bit of a philosophy on government, a thought on government first. And it has to deal with a pamphlet. I guess you really want to call it a book. It's only about 60, 70 pages or so long, called The Anatomy of the State. And it's wrote by Murray Rothbard. And in it, he discusses a lot of things, talking about how the state exists, how the rules, kind of the laws that dictate the state, how it takes from its citizens and as such. But what I really want to bring up from the book, and make sure you don't think of this as an idea I completely thought of or anything, I did learn this from another thinker, is he talks about how back during what is viewed as the Dark Ages, as the time of turmoil, you had a lot of warlords and lords and kings, of course, too, going to war, fighting over land. And he talks about how at that time, while history reflects on that as the quote-unquote Dark Ages, a dark time, for the general citizens, the peasants, serfs, whatever you want to call them, it really was a little bit of a time of stability kind of for them. It was a time that really didn't affect them per se, because realistically in their lives, regardless of who the Lord was, as long as they were not taking too much in taxes, were not taking too much off their table, the serfs, the peasants, didn't really mind who was in charge of them. And largely wars were fought away from populations between two professional armies, and whoever won got that land and then was in charge of collecting up the taxes from the land. But as long as the taxes stayed the same and it wasn't taking too much off the citizens' plates, it didn't really affect them too much, unless the ruler failed to do a few things. Unless first the ruler failed to go ahead and keep their taxes in line if they were taking too much. As long as the serfs could put food on their table and put a roof over their head and live without necessarily extreme want of your necessities, they largely were unbothered. But the other thing they had to provide was security, was free from crime and those types of things. And when the lords or warlords, kings, whatever you want to call them, failed in doing so, it would lead to discomfort amongst the people and it would lead to rebellion. Well, in our modern times, we certainly are, by a percentage, taxed a lot more than they were back in the days. I mean, we can reflect upon the fact that our founding fathers, of course, rebelled against tax rates that are much, much lower than what we pay today. I believe it was, a 2% tax on tea that led to them getting upset and throwing tea into the harbor, of course. And so we can see that obviously today we get a lot more taxes taken from us, but we also receive a lot more services from the government. Now, of course, the problem for governments in doing this is that when things go wrong, well, they receive the blame. Even things maybe government can't control. For an example, government can't control that a hurricane came through and flooded parts of North Carolina, as an example. However, because we give so much to the government, we do expect them to solve that problem. We expect them to come in and rebuild the areas. We expect them to respond to emergency management. Now, government could make the decision to go ahead and not take nearly as much and say, look, that's not our role. All we can do is defend you from being conquered from another nation and stop your neighbors from stealing from you. But outside of that, which, by the way, is pretty much what our founders envisioned this country to be about, outside of that, we can't do anything else for you. We don't control the weather. We didn't create the damage to you. And we don't take enough from you to fix it. But government does take too much. And so what we're seeing across, I think, citizenry in general is a realization right now that government is creating a lot of our problems. We see Democrats lamenting this all the time in national media. We see that they will say, why didn't these poor people in red areas, these rural people that are largely on, and they're by percentage larger than other areas on welfare and government assistance, why are they voting for people who, in their opinion, in their viewpoint, want to tear that down? And they're missing the point that these citizens don't want to be handed things by their government. They don't need their lord or king to go ahead and take care of them. They want to be left alone enough to take care of themselves, because they've realized if they lean on the government to take care of them, it's unreliable. It can be taken away. There are failures and headaches to that compared to being your own man or woman, but your own man who's in charge of your own destiny. And so with that realization, Democrats are having a hard time wrapping their mind around it, and so is the establishment Republicans. They are failing to understand that humans in general are not driven to be lorded over. We're driven to be free. We're driven to be able to take care of our own family, our children, without help from other people. We don't want to ask for handouts. We don't want government to get overly involved. And there are a sect of Republicans that are getting this now. Like I said, we see that nationally, obviously. We see a lot more conversation about shrinking government, shrinking its roles, getting it out of your life, asking why does the government do this? For an example, a lot of conversation around getting rid of the Federal Department of Education. But we're seeing some Republicans still deciding to go ahead and stay with the establishment thought process of government needs to do more. Of course, this is largely driven by their own desire to stay in office. You see, they can't fund elections in their minds. They can't fund an election without, of course, the massive donations they get from the donor class, which anybody who listens to the show I know calls the investor class. And if they're not doing things for that investor class, making government work for them where they get a payoff where it can protect their industry through regulation or through government handouts and be able to prop up these businesses, it's almost like a money laundering scheme. Well, then they cannot remain in office. And so they're refusing to let go of some situations. And we see a perfect example coming out of Boone County. And I'm going to wrap this in to an overall larger story and just kind of points to make on spending as a whole going on within our state. Because right now in Boone County, there's a tiff, a fight of sorts going on their county fiscal court. And that, of course, those of you just basic government here for you all, fiscal court is made up of county magistrates. Think of that like a city council. For those of you who live in like Lexington and Louisville and don't probably pay a whole lot of attention to who your magistrates are, because those are urban county governments now where the city council is fulfilling the role of what the county magistrates would do. But your magistrates are kind of like city council, and then you have a judge executive. And the judge executive is like the mayor of the county. And up in Boone County, there has been an ongoing debate regarding EV charging stations. This is largely being spurred on by the fact that the federal government, through their Inflation Reduction Act and green projects, have went ahead and put aside billions of dollars for places to put in place a electric vehicle charging stations. And apparently they said that Boone County is a desert for electric vehicle charging. However, some members of the county fiscal court has taken issue with the idea of inviting the federal government in to build these, and also what is the role of your county government should government even be getting into this in the first place. And what these county commissioners are fighting against is this concept you see from state and local government individuals that view federal dollars and, if you're a county government, state dollars as free money. Like, this is just free money being handed out by the federal government and state government. Why wouldn't we take it? It's not going to cost our taxpayers anything, putting that in quotations. And that mindset is promulgating a lot of our issues. So we're going to dig into that story, kind of wrap that into funding in general going on within the state after this short break. And you're back here with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Before the break, I was talking about how Boone County Fiscal Court is having a little bit of a debate, and I think it's important that we look at the debate, whether or not you live in Boone County, because one, the thought process is some of the Republicans on the county, the fiscal court, the county court, their thought processes are largely what I view as in large part what's wrong with a lot of our elected representatives, how they think about money. In this case, it has to do with EV charging stations. Now, I'm going to reference one county magistrate's ex-post on this, Chet Hand. He's a county commissioner there. And I'm going to reference a lot of his tweet here that he sent out because the local paper there wrote an article about this ongoing fight. And he brought up the fact that Gary Moore, who's the judge executive, this is now coming from his post, he said, one argument from Gary Moore's administration is that the federal government has identified our county stretch of I-75-71 as an EV charging station desert. So what Chet is setting up here is that the judge executive is stating that they should take these free federal dollars to build electric vehicle charging stations because they are, quote unquote, an EV charging station desert. Now, Chet Hand takes a smart approach in explaining this, but first, let's deal with that argument of, well, these are just free federal dollars, let's take it. You see, the problem is it doesn't matter whether the money comes out of the state coffers, the federal coffers, the county coffers, the city coffers. All that money is coming from one place, your pocket. And as long as local governments continue to take in these federal dollars, well, not only are they not viewing this as proper taxing procedure, when they see funding coming down from the federal government for something that they're viewing as useless, and in this case, several of the members of the county fiscal court view it as useless. We'll go into Chet's arguments here as to why in a second, but not only if you're taking money for something that's useless, you're not only pushing this idea that the federal government should continue to do these things because they can point at it and say, look, these county governments have went ahead and taken it on, but you're also giving up large amounts of control. For an example, the drinking age in this country is 21. Now, there is never, a federal law passed saying that the drinking age shall be 21. In fact, if the federal government passed a law out of Congress saying the drinking age shall be 21 by law, there is no choice about it, that would probably be struck down as unconstitutional because, of course, for the federal government to interfere into state dealings, they have to show that it has an interstate commerce effect. That's the only thing that the federal government's allowed to regulate and say what states will do, in large part, is if there's an interstate commerce situation. So the federal government, as such, enforces the Constitution. So it doesn't matter whether it's your city, your county, your state, if they are violating your constitutional rights, your rights to property or your rights to own a firearm, the federal government is supposed to step in and stop that. But it's also only supposed to regulate interstate commerce, that things that go on within the state itself is not the government's role. In this case, the drinking age is an intra-state issue. So what the federal government did is they tied federal funds for roads tied to whether or not you set the drinking age at 21 within your state. Now, these funds are picked up at the fuel pumps within these states. They're picked up at as a gas tax, of course, and then they get doled back out. But if you, as a state, refuse to set your drinking age at 21, you would be affected by it. Now, in large part, the push to change this drinking age was lobbied for by the insurance companies because they saw there was a lot of drunk driving incidences at younger ages. Naturally, as you are first driving and you first come in contact with alcohol, you're more likely to drive drunk. I'm not saying that's the only people who do. And so they lobbied the federal government to move the age to 21 because they could collect the same insurance premiums, and they said we would have less payouts. We'd also have an excuse to have less payouts too as well. We'd be able to assign liability a little bit better. And so the federal government complied, and now here in this country you can choose to go to war and die for your country, but you can't drink a beer legally and buy one unless you're 21. That's an example of how taking in these federal funds, you're giving up control over your own lives of your citizens and you're surrendering it to the federal government. Well, that goes into why we should kind of keep government away from these things, but let's go into the argument over the EV charging desert itself. Let's go into the merits of this specific argument, because it'd be hard if you have something like a water system that you're providing within the county and it's broken, it needs help, and the federal government's offering you money, it'd be hard to turn it down. But in this case, we're talking about, is this even something we should be taking federal dollars for in the first place? Now, the arguments for and against, I'll lay out here. This is the argument against coming from Chet Hand. He says that it has also been stated that this could be a revenue generating source for the county. So putting in these EV chargers as an EV charging desert. Well, first let's deal with the desert claim. In it here, Chet in his tweet points out that there are not, it's weird that they would call it an EV charging desert, considering that there's around 20 or so EV chargers on this stretch of highway in Boone County already being built at private businesses, at gas stations and other things. So the claim of it being an EV charging desert just means the federal government has come in and said, look, there's no federally available chargers, so we believe it's a desert. There's no government chargers, even though private businesses are already stepping in. Now, Gary's Moore is arguing, I guess, that we should accept these chargers because it will help the local economy, that you should take this federal money, it's free money, it's going to help the local economy. Here's Chet Hand's argument back. And as I said, you don't live maybe in Boone County, but this is an exact argument and discussion going on in every single county fiscal court in this state. And if it hasn't already happened, it will. And so you need to be aware of that. But also goes into, once again, the mindset of these elected politicians. So Chet says, it has also been stated that this could be a revenue generating source for the county and will attract EV drivers off of the highway to patronize our businesses. While I have no firm data on this, it stands to reason that if EV chargers were lucrative and attracted businesses, the private sector would already be doing it at scale. Additionally, 2 of the locations proposed are in Burlington, which is far from the highway and would only serve to attract non-local traffic onto our already congested local roads. The 3rd location is off of Richwood, which is already highly congested. Keep in mind that because of the nature of this grant, these proposed 9 EV stations would have to be on public property, i.e. county or state. It would be owned and operated by the county, and we would be responsible for the cost and staffing to maintain the units and potential replacement in the future. All of the other concerns aside, the main question is, should the government be in the business of owning and operating EV charging stations and selling electricity to the public? To me, this answer is very clearly no. We, the government, don't own and operate gas stations and sell gas to the public. We don't own and operate hydrogen filling stations and sell hydrogen. Why would we own EV charging stations then? That's a good argument being laid out. It also points to the fact, and this is where long-term stability, deals and long-term investments here, quote unquote, should really be done by private industry. Because let's think about this for a second. If you are somebody, maybe you're somebody who believes that electric vehicles are 100% the future. It's not going to be hydrogen. We're not going to do fuel. That here in 20, 30 years, it'll be electric vehicles, and we need to get in on this now. We need to advance towards that. Well, if you wanted that to actually happen, you would need to be setting up solutions like charging solutions that have long-term viability. The problem with the government being in the business of EV charging stations is that now you have private businesses competing against the government on the marketplace of how much we're going to sell electricity for. And the problem with competing against the government is it is a non-profit entity. So you're taking gas stations that would be for-profit entities and you're making them compete against non-profit entities. That's a big difference. That means that the government naturally can take a loss. If they take a loss, they can just tax more. Private companies don't have that choice. They have to operate. We've seen this with golf courses, for an example. When you see the government getting involved with golf courses, you'll start to see more and more public courses, but you'll see privately run courses greatly shrink because it's a losing proposition to operate a privately run golf course unless you're just an elite course where you have a country club type atmosphere where you're not open to the public, because you're now competing against the government that literally can take a loss. In fact, they're supposed to take a loss. The mindset of those working, for example, with golf courses within government is that we should be taking a loss, because if we're not taking a loss on our golf course, if we're breaking even or making a profit, then we're not providing a service to our citizens that they're paying the taxes for. So because we're not providing that service, we need to lose money. And then in that case, we're now providing a service that they're giving us their tax dollars for. That's an important point because long-term speaking, you are pricing private companies out of the market. Now, of course, Chet's right as far as the incentive. You'll see places like Buc-ee's or Myers or grocery stores put up these chargers for an important reason. When you pull in to plug in your vehicle, you're probably there 10, 20, 30 minutes. And during that time, you now do patronize other businesses. You're kind of stuck there. Or if you own a Tesla, you can play games, of course, too. Driving games, they let you play there. But you now are walking around that store, spending your 10, 20, 30 minutes, however long you need to be there to charge up to what you need to charge up to. And you're probably going to buy something. So it should be lucrative for these gas stations and other places to put these in. And if they're not, then obviously there is an assumption that they're going to patronize businesses that is inaccurate. But this idea of spending government money and long-term investments that actually will play out long-term and build longevity in an industry without needing government subsidizing everything, well, that's now coming back to haunt Kentucky as we are facing what is projected to be a revenue drop in taxes here next year. We'll go over that after this short break. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So we've all heard Beshear claim that our economy's on fire. It's going great. We've heard our state legislators claim the same thing. Well, according to a report submitted by the state budget director, John Hicks, in fiscal year 2025, which began this past July, the state revenues, that's what they call it, it's taxes, the state income from taxes, how much money they have to waste, is expected to drop 1.4%. Now, this is only the third time this has happened in 50 years. Only the third time in 50 years that our revenues as a state and from taxes will drop. And it's no surprise this is going to happen because our economy over the past several years has been built here in the state on a fugazi, on a fake, on a house of cards per se. Because we haven't seen a whole lot of long-term stable investments. Instead, what we've seen is our state doling out hundreds of millions of dollars into these green energy handouts to be, as Beshear said, we want to be the electric vehicle manufacturing capital of the world and all these other economic incentives. And the problem is that these millions of dollars they're handing out, well, it's not coming back into the coffers because what they're giving money to don't really pan out for them. And to give you an example of these investments that the state has made, you have all around the state these tech centers that we spend tens of millions of years giving money to. Those of you who listen to the show for any length of time know I've talked about these groups before. I'm talking about things like Awesome Inc. in Lexington, Amplify in Louisville, SOAR in Pikeville, Blue North in Covington. And we give them these tens of millions of dollars a year, and they're supposed to be kind of like startup hubs, where if you've got a tech business idea, a startup idea, you come in there, they help you generate your business plans, everything else, and they help you get in contact with would-be investors, right? That's the service they're supposed to provide. Now, this entire process of finding investors and accelerators and getting your business off the ground and finding people willing to kind of dump money into pushing it forward is naturally going to create less viable businesses because you now have an incentive playing out that maybe doesn't or shouldn't, let's say, be involved. Because when government is the one paying for these people to be connected with investors, and there's somebody's job to do that, and they're incentivized to do that, bad ideas are going to be expertly sold rather than good ideas just being recognized by investors and money put into. If the state needs to give you tens of millions of dollars a year in services, in order for your business to get off the ground, maybe your business wasn't good to begin with. Maybe it wasn't a great idea. That's why you're not attracting in investors. But we've seen these centers used to do things like help, quote unquote, diverse individuals find and start up businesses to navigate things. Now, I would claim that if the problem is that You have individuals who have great ideas out there that want to get their businesses off the ground and they're having difficulties with it. Maybe we shouldn't be investing in these tens of millions of dollars a year into these innovation centers, but rather deregulating our state, making it easier for you to just own and operate a business in Kentucky, where you don't need a CPA or a lawyer to be able to put together a business and have it legally operate within the state, though largely that's what many people found. I can tell you as a business owner, I don't have a business degree, but I was able to figure it out by learning and talking to other people of how you kind of can at least start a business and operate a business. But if you don't have those people to lean on and talk to, it would be very difficult for you to understand how to just file articles of incorporation. It can be overwhelming. You've got a great idea. You could be great at running a business and operating one. You could know your industry well, but if you don't know paperwork that the regulations on it are thousands of pages thick, well, you can't get started in the first place. But instead of dealing with that problem, we're instead going to dump tens of millions of dollars into these innovation centers. And not only have we not seen any real returns on those investments, and we know we haven't, because I remember watching some of these hearings when they're handing out these millions of dollars, and a few of the legislators kind of quietly brought up the fact of what are the returns we're seeing here. And that answer has never been really given. We know it hasn't, because if these innovation centers have really delivered to us great successes, well, those would be publicized by Beshear and others, saying, look, we've spent tens of millions of tax dollars on this, and it's working out for Kentuckians, and it is a quote-unquote return on the investment. Because they do call it that. Anytime the government's spending this kind of money on these business initiatives, they call it an investment that they hope will pay off for them into the future. In fact, these so-called innovation centers and this this group of people that are now being taxpayer subsidized has actually led to some of the greatest failures that we've seen recently in waste of tax dollar funds. For an example, we have App Harvest. This was an indoor growing company, indoor hydroponics or whatever, and they'd grow tomatoes and other things in Kentucky. And the entire idea was that they would build these indoor greenhouses, gigantic greenhouses, and they would build them on prior coal mining lands that otherwise are useless, and be able to bring jobs to eastern Kentucky, growing and picking and harvesting tomatoes and strawberries and other things that can sell here on the market. Of course, it hit a lot of problems. Number one being the founder of this didn't have a whole lot of experience in hydroponics to begin with. Number two, they quickly discovered that they couldn't actually build on land. I did an intensive episode on App Harvest that you can find in my library there. But my main point here is this is a company which got a $50 million loan from the USDA that was pushed forward by these quote-unquote innovation centers and doled out there a lot by them, and the speakers brought in to inspire. Well, a few months after they got this $50 million from the USDA, they went into bankruptcy. You also have these battery factories like Ascend Elements in Hopkinsville, got $125 million from the federal government in September, and they just announced there last month that they're pretty much indefinitely suspending their building out there, and they laid off over 100 individuals. These are flash-in-the-pan businesses that have no longevity. But that's common. See, this is the thing. When it comes to startups and tech businesses and everything else, this is common. Not every company you put money into is going to be a Facebook or a Twitter or a Uber or the next whatever. Some of them may be flash-in-the-pan businesses that go awful. That's why there are private companies that invest money into individuals that are running these companies, and they take a look at the people that they're dealing with, what their business plan is, their acumen, everything else, and then they make an intelligent decision about whether or not they want to put their investment money into it. And they know most of the time their investments won't work out, but they put in, $100,000 or $500,000 or a couple of million into a startup business, and they do that with maybe 20, 30, 40 in hopes that one of them does become Facebook, where it's worth so much and they make so much off of it that it ends up paying off for them. But the government is now getting involved in this. They see this happening in other places. They saw it happening in places like Silicon Valley, and as such, they decide, why can't it happen here in Kentucky? What we need to do is just subsidize this so it does happen here in Kentucky, and it's led to these flash-in-the-pan businesses with no longevity. And because of that, we've been spending our millions of dollars on things that don't provide greater tax base, don't get more people to work, solving that problem, our workforce participation rate, huge problem. And so, because we haven't actually gotten a return on any of these monies, we're going to go ahead and see for the, like I said, third time in 50 years, the state revenues drop. Now, I wish it was dropping because they lowered our taxes. I do want the government to spend less, make no mistake. But the fact that it's dropping now without an actual decrease in taxes going on tells you that there's a decrease in revenues going on across businesses, and that this stimulation they've been doing over the last several years of our economy, using those federal dollars that are being pumped out there, the COVID relief funds and everything else that they've been using to kind of prop up these businesses, were bad investments that are not paying off. But instead of recognizing that, it's full steam ahead to the point where just this past month, the state is setting aside another $6 million to provide funds for a entrepreneurship innovation hub in northern Kentucky. This is reading from the contract summary here. It's to bring together growing companies, investors, and support organizations under one roof. So it's just full speed ahead. Well, we'll go over to anybody taking accountability for this after this short break. And you're back on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So today's show, I've kind of been spelling out how this thought process in our politicians of what government's role is coming back to haunt them. That if we had more people think like Chet Hand, the commissioner out of Boone County, pointing out that sure, it's free federal funds for battery chargers, but this isn't government's role, we would actually be living in a more stable, more prosperous environment in general. If more people had more money in their pockets, we would have more longevity in an economy not based upon the house of cards that has been hundreds upon hundreds of millions of dollars of tax handouts that have been largely the thing that Bashir is putting out there as his big accomplishments in our economy. And the question will be that as we start to see more and more problems here, is anybody going to take accountability for it and make the needed changes? Now, I pointed out before the break that at least these entrepreneurship hubs that have showed no return on investment worth talking about based on the fact that, well, nobody's talked about and instead has led to some of the greatest failures like App Harvest. Are the government going to pump the brakes on that? No, in fact, they just set aside $6 million for another one to go up in Kenton County in northern Kentucky. Now, what's interesting is we see a national conversation going here with DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, kind of looking at some of these things, talking about cutting some of those things. And we see some people jumping on board, but we see some people resistant because they have to admit that they failed. I think that accountability is important. So will Bashir take accountability for pushing forward and claiming these accomplishments that, based upon the fact that the state isn't going to be doing better financially now, that the Biden handouts have dried up, but instead will now be doing worst? Probably not, considering the fact that when App Harvest was the talk of the town, was the future, was the answer to our problems, especially what to do with the Eastern Kentucky. Bashir called it Kentucky's next Toyota, ignoring the fact that, of course, Toyota coming into Kentucky was already a decades-old car company that has shown its ability to have profitability and a business model that results in a return. But he called it the next Toyota. But when App Harvest went into bankruptcy, mum was the word. Or even take the battery recycling plant down in Hopkinsville. Bashir applauded its initial investment and was really happy about it. But instead, when he was asked for opinion on the fact that it was postponing and indefinitely putting aside their building and laying off people, mum was the word. In fact, when the Ford battery plant that our state put $410 million into, its future has become on shaky ground as we see the UAW is trying to unionize that battery plant, something that would be a nail in the coffin of that manufacturing facility because it could no longer compete with any of the other electric vehicle manufacturers around the world because they're not unionized. Many of them are not. Tesla, for example, is not. When asked for comment on that, Bashir mum was the word. So he's not going to say much at all. But will the legislators take accountability for this? Will they take accountability for the fact that they've been wasting tens of millions on these innovation centers and building a new one at $6 million? Will they take accountability for the $410 million they gave to the Ford battery plant when it ends up probably not working out? Will they take accountability for the millions of dollars that they gave the battery recycling plant down in Hopkinsville? No, they're not going to take accountability for that. In fact, recently I was talking to a member of our state house, a Republican. He's higher up, of course, in, as far as leadership and everything else goes. And I was talking to him about how we should be just cut to 0% income tax already and just tighten your belts. Let's just get it done. Tighten your belts, figure out how to do what you need to do with less. Cut things that need to be cut. And his claim was that, well, where would we cut at? I asked him, do you listen to the show on a regular basis at all? Do you see the posts I make where I'm pointing out places where we're spending millions of dollars at a time on things that are complete waste? And he did respond by saying, yeah, sure, but that is kind of small potatoes. And we see that thought process too with DOGE on the national level. They're pointing out places where we have cuts. They're talking about federal workers need to go into the office and cuts there. They're talking about we have 423 government agencies. We can cut it down to 99. Something that the left is calling pure anarchy, saying that government can't survive if we go from 423 federal agencies down to 99. An absolutely crazy assertion. And generally speaking, those who are looking at it say, well, those are small potatoes. We're talking about millions here, billions here, or as such, or at the state level case, you're talking about $1 million here or $1 million there, and that is just not enough to make a difference. But the problem is, it's not just the mindset of we need to cut the millions you've already been spending on useless things, but it's also we need to stop spending those millions of dollars into the future because you're setting up perpetual spending. You're building and building and building to more and more spending, and these millions become billions. In fact, if our state government cut just 5% from their state budget that they have control over, so our state budget is, $60-70 billion, but a lot of that is federal money coming down because the state administers things like Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, those types of things that the state really doesn't have a choice in how that money's spent, where it's spent, or to make cuts. They have some choices on how that money's handed out, but they don't really have a choice on, per se, efficiency cuts. That has to be done at the federal level. But at the state level, what we do have control over is right around about $28 to $30 billion. So a 5% cut would be right at $1.5 billion. To say this another way, there's around about 2 million Kentuckians that actually work. Now, all the rest of them either are out of the workforce because they're children or too old, or they should be working, but they're leeches sucking off those who do work in order to continue to survive because, of course, as government does more, as I said this before, as government taxes more, it has to do more for people in order to justify that taxing. And government ends up saying, hey, I can take away all the consequences of your actions for you. And in turn, that ends up to people saying, well, if there's not going to be any consequences for my actions, then it doesn't matter what I do. And so they end up making horrible decisions and they end up deciding they're not going to work. So across that around 2 million people that are working, it's probably a little bit less than 2 million, that would be about an extra $750 a year. Just cutting 5% of what the state budget of what they can cut. 5%. $750 a year per person that's working. If you're in a 2-working household, that's about $1,500 more a year. That may seem like small potatoes, 5%. That's not enough to cut to some of these people in government. But to the citizens, to a household that's struggling to put food on the table, another $1,500 a year can make a huge difference. That's over $100 a month extra. That can help cover your grocery bill, can it not? But no, that's too small potatoes for them to worry about, for them to deal with. But not only by giving that money back to the citizens, would you be helping them put food on their table, but also in general, giving that money back to the citizens is how we actually create an economy that we can build on that doesn't go up or down. You know, there's an idea in Austrian economics that's kind of the anti-government intervention economics thought that says that, you know, entire economies going bang and bust together at once, all industries going up and down at the same time, is surely the result, only the result because of government intervention. Of course, there'll be natural factors, like, you know, wheat could go up in price one year because was, you know, a drought in some places, and so you'll see individual markets go up and down, but entire economy going bankrupt, going into a Great Depression is only the result of government interventionism. And that is because they take money from your pocket and they pump it into things they think is a good idea, but really a lot of times end up not being it. And that wraps us back around to what we started talking about with this Boone County situation and how it all ties in. When you are pushing forward an idea that government should be getting involved into a private industry, you're not going to have longevity. You're not going to have an economy you can build on. It's going to come crashing down eventually. And your only hope as a politician is that, well, maybe you can avoid accountability for that if you try to hide from your own decisions. But at the end of the day, I think we're going to see that you'll end up being held accountable because the citizens are waking up to this and they're seeing it and they're more upset. The whole idea of a few $1 million here or there doesn't matter. That doesn't wash with them anymore. Well, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Thank you all so much for joining me. We'll see you back here later this week. Hope you have a great rest of your day.